All right, tag team back again. It's week 29, price controls.
Wrong one.
In the early days of the internet, radical libertarians were scattered, lonely, and faceless. Without direction, they resigned to scour the web, sifting through content providers in a wasteland plagued by YouTube demonetization, Facebook jail, and covert internet censorship. But then, in 2017, the Libertarian Union was formed. Finally, the average Joe Libertarian could find a thriving community of independent podcasters and content providers, all in one convenient location. At Libertarian Union, we'll always have the latest news, interviews, discussions, and even movie reviews. With hundreds of episodes and more added all the time, you'll always find something fresh at libertarianunion.com.
All right, and that was, of course, Patrick's lovely wife, Patrick of the Liberty Weekly podcast, and I'm Daniel from the Actual Anarchy podcast, and we are joined by other members of the Libertarian Union doing a New Year's special, and I'm not really sure how we're going to go about this, maybe talk about our various shows and maybe our top, I don't know, 3 or 4 favorite whatevers, and kind of do a round-robin style tournament of conversation in this sausage fest that is the Libertarian Union. So, I'm Daniel. I do the Actual Anarchy podcast with my co-host Robert. He's on the line with us. We talk about movies from a Rothbardian and anarcho-capitalist perspective. We also run the actualanarchy.com website, which features news and articles as well as our show. We also do Read Rothbard, The Conquest of Bread, and I also do Blacken.gold, which is a website devoted to being able to figure out how to earn a living online where you can vote with your feet and live anywhere in the world where you prefer to be. And that's my little spiel. Why don't we pass the mic over to Don't Waste Your Hate Boys.
All right, I'm Tony Rockamora, and yeah, we do Don't Waste Your Hate, a very conversational podcast. We kind of cover all topics, and my co-host is Jeff. He's also on the line, so go ahead, Jeff, introduce yourself.
What's up, guys? Jeff, Don't Waste Your Hate. Find me at Invalid Beard on Twitter, where I'm pretty active. Happy to be here.
I suppose I should have said, Robert, do you have any kind words about our show before we go to Trey?
Yeah, I think it's a pretty good show. You should listen to it if you haven't been. Every once in a while, we come out with a pretty good episode. So, yeah, we talk about all that good stuff.
Hey everybody, my name's Trey Weaver with the Subversion Webcast. My podcast started off in the beginning of 2017 as a musician sort of interview format where I would talk to musicians and just talk about music. I felt constrained by that format and decided to politically unsanitize the whole thing and make it a little dirty with liberty. And spend a lot of time lately as I've went to libertarian topics talking about the war state and police state. And I'd like to explore going into 2018 what we can do to subvert culture and find more freedom in an unfree world.
Very nice. And speaking of subverting liberty, or with dirty liberty, let's go to the Kinky Wizard.
What? All right. I'm Kenny. I do a podcast, Wizardly Wisdom, which is mainly interviews and talking about some nerdy topics too. I haven't been doing many recently, but I'm trying to switch to do a video interview because I feel like you have to get the full visual experience in 2018. So hopefully that'll come together. But yeah, just all of my interviews, they were pretty cool. I interviewed some pretty interesting people, and I hope to do some more this coming year.
All right. And speaking of coming in the new year, let's go to Patrick, who's in the closet.
Yeah, that's right. This is Patrick MacFarlane with the Liberty Weekly podcast. I started the podcast back in May of 2017. While the impetus of it was a blogging site that I started earlier, but then I met up with my buddy Jerry McCullum, and we started the podcast proper. Since then, I've experimented a lot with formats, but there's always been the podcast component to that. So, like Kenny said, I kind of figured that there in 2017 or 2018, there has to be a face that goes along with the show. And so I started doing like Corbett Report style documentary stuff that I've been experimenting with. And I've had a lot of fun. I've met a lot of good people that are on this call currently, and really excited to do this New Year's wrap-up, man. I'm currently in the closet. I got to elaborate on that because I'm visiting my wife's family in Utah, and so I jumped in her walk-in closet from her childhood bedroom, so that's where I'm at right now.
All right, very good. And you just mentioned putting a face on Liberty. I think we have one other person on here who we don't have video on, and that is Kyle Anzalone of Foreign Policy Focus. How you doing, Kyle?
I'm doing pretty good. Thanks. I'm so excited to be on here today talking with all of you. Foreign Policy Focus, I talk about foreign policy stuff 3 days a week, and I do a news roundup too, so I stay pretty busy with this Liberty stuff.
All right, very good. And let's see. So this is like a New Year's celebration. Maybe we should look back a little bit. Do we want to just kind of go through maybe our top 3 favorite shows that we did in the past year, or favorite guests, or something along those lines? Does that sound reasonable to everyone?
Sounds good.
All right.
I really want to talk about why does everybody do this question. That's what we should start with. I'll start. And what it is that I don't know what else to do right now. Like, I sense there's something really wrong with the world, and I'm really trying to learn more about it, and at the same time try and inform some people about it. But it gets kind of frustrating because it doesn't seem to work very often. But I just don't know what else to do. So that's why I'm trying to up the game this year, get video going, kind of trying to emulate culture. But the reason is that there's something going on with the way the culture is working, and I think that it's important to try to do something about it. Just take some action. Doesn't necessarily doing nothing. Doesn't often result in change.
I would agree with that. Yeah. And while we're trying to figure out how to figure out how we manage this conversation, so perhaps the person who's making a response then directs a question to someone else, so we just keep kind of passing the hot potato. Does that sound good?
Yeah, and you spoke up, Dan. I think that you are perfect to answer this question. I'm very interested in a little bit more explanation on why you keep doing this, even though there's a lot of resistance.
Speaking of resistance, we just did the Last Jedi last night, and it's gonna be posted today. So yeah, resist, right? That's the whole anti-Trump thing, not my president. Yeah. So Robert and I, we were doing the Reed Rothbard podcast last year, and we were just having conversations between us, and then we started talking about movies or relating things to movies, and we decided to make that more of our shtick or our trope, and that's, at least in my view, that culture is a big driver in what becomes acceptable to the masses over the course of time. So an example would be the whole gay marriage thing. It was sort of like a taboo subject, but then it gets introduced in Will and Grace and Friends and things like that, and lo and behold, 20 years later, it's top of mind politically, and it becomes a a social movement, whatever. And so I think culture really drives a lot of where policy goes and where people's attention goes towards things in the future. And so I want to be in a position to where we're sort of critiquing that culture or something that is driving a lot of culture, and that is, Hollywood movies, television, things like that. So we focus on movies because doing a TV series would just be a lot of legwork up front to be able to talk coherently about it. But movies are a very compact thing, just a couple of hours, and there's generally a plot, unless it's a Star Wars movie, and then you actually have some little points to sink your teeth into and have good discussions. And Robert and I, we've been doing that for a while. We have guests fairly often, though some of my favorite episodes are when it's just Robert and I. No offense to any of our guests, and many of you have been our guests. But we just kind of have a little rapport that we've built up over the past 35 years. And I'll pass it to Robert for some color on that.
Yeah, that's all true. All the things that Daniel just mostly said there. I would just like to add that it's worthwhile to target and change the minds of these lefties that are coming. Yes, it's been pointed out that a lot of these lefty, like Antifa-type people and the people coming out of the universities are pussies. And I think there's some validity in that. But it's the pussies that are the first ones to run to government and big daddy government to make policy changes. I think if you've got your righty type Republican conservative types who kind of understand what the state is, they are less likely to run to government to get some kind of policy change, which directly affects us in our liberty-loving lives. So I think that's a really good target point, and culture is where you do that. That's how you slowly change minds, and sometimes quickly. Like Obama, when he came into office, he was against gay marriage. Trump is actually the first president to come in endorsing gay marriage.
That's right.
It's a fairly recent thing. So yeah, it's super important. Kenny, you have any more thoughts on that? Kenny still here?
Kenny went dark.
Oh, okay. Can you guys hear me now?
Yep.
I was saying, Kyle, do you have some stuff to say about why you do it? I mean, you're among the most productive of us, and you actually have some pretty hard-hitting content, detailed. So, what gets you going to spend all this time and figure all this stuff out?
I mean, mostly it's just because it's the worst thing ever. I know I talk about Yemen a lot, and we were pointing out that on my year-end wrap-up show that's pretty much like all I had talked about over the past few weeks. But there's a genocide going on right now, and so if you're just somebody who wants to focus your effort on preventing the worst thing in the world from happening, and that's just kind of what I want to do right now. I figure I'm kind of a young guy, so I got on my podcast thing, and I'm just trying to get good at it at this point. And, I hope I'm getting better. I think the end of the year show was the best one I did. So, it feels like things are moving in the right direction for, me and my podcasting. And I got the show on the Libertarian Institute and everything like that. So, it's just about trying to capture more of an audience and expose, the worst things that are happening in the world. So that's the big thing. Also, just pointing out with, what they're saying about the left and reaching out to the left. One of the ways to do it is on the war issue. If these people are all up in arms about Trump not letting, somebody from Iraq into the United States, let's talk about the people with them that are, being bombed in Iraq and the Iraqi children being killed. So, I mean, that should be a good starting point. Unfortunately, a lot of people don't want to hear it because Obama did something wrong there. But still moving forward, and as people lose their emotional attachment for Obama, maybe we can start making some progress with the left on the war issue again. So, the Don't Waste Your Hate podcast was the last one I was on, and I really enjoyed being on there. So you guys want to talk a little bit about why you do it?
Sure, Jeff, you want to take that or what?
Yeah, I'll start us off. So, we had Kyle on, and it was a great conversation. And Kyle, I have your year-end Yemen article from the Libertarian Institute queued up to read. This is an issue that I've only recently become aware of and horrified of. And I guess for why we're doing what we're doing and why we started the show is that we've been big consumers of liberty topics and economics. I think Tony and I probably both started on the economic side and into Austrian economics, like a lot of people do. Started off right around the time the Ron Paul's 2008 campaign was ramping up. By the way, I rewatched some clips today because of what's going on in Iran and some of his presidential debate, comments on Iran, and I just have to say I do miss him in the national scene. Just speaking, truth to power in those situations was just awesome to watch, and you can understand why so many people got into the movement from him. But I think just sort of piggyback on what Kyle said, we're just trying to get better at it. Not sure where it's going to go, but we found that people are closer on these issues, I think, than they realize, and that the national political conversation tends to polarize things to the elite's advantage. And if you sit down and just have a conversation with people, especially on the war issue, for example, you find that the majority of the people, especially those that you voluntarily associate with in your life, they're going to agree with you on a lot of the stuff. And it's a matter of just sort of stripping away those false narratives and getting down to hard truths and putting to them, do you really believe in this issue? If you do, here are the implications. Have you thought this through? And I think Tony and I agree that those conversations and culture in general are the way that you actually move a society forward and in the direction of liberty. So, we're excited to see, what we can do in the new year, take on new goals. And just want to say it's been great how welcoming the liberty community has been, in welcoming us.
You're welcome, as Michael Malice would say. Tony, you want to chime in on that?
I guess as far as why we started the podcast, me personally, I started consuming podcasts in general, I would say about 2 years ago. So yeah, the 2008 and then the 2012 Ron Paul campaign, I was really into it. I posted a lot on Facebook for it, and I really followed it. And then I was just totally dejected after the whole thing. And I kind of took, honestly, a few years off as far as just paying attention to shit. I just kind of zoned out, and, I just felt like, man, I was younger and more excited at the time. And then I just kind of started to get depressed because of what happened to Ron Paul and how he was kind of pushed aside, even though he had so much support, groundswell of support. And I'm sure a lot of you guys have the same kind of feeling. So anyway, I guess 2014-ish, my friend was like, oh yeah, I listen to Joe Rogan all the time. So I started listening to Joe Rogan, and then I started listening to Tom Woods around that same time. And, that was kind of getting me back into things. Then I think I started listening to Jason Stapleton, and then I just branched out. I probably have 15, 20 podcasts on my queue at all times at this point. Recently, I just added Foreign Policy Focus because I got Kyle to get on Stitcher, so I'm listening to that a lot now, which is great. But yeah, I think a lot of my initial inspiration came from listening to a lot of these Joe Rogan conversations, and he's definitely not libertarian as far as the purity tests that some people might want to put him through. But he's got a lot of libertarian leanings, and I just love the style of his conversation. I think as far as what I'm doing when I talk is, I know I am not an academic. I know I'm not on that level, but I like to talk to, I guess, what I would consider regular blue-collar people, as far as that goes. Maybe not necessarily blue-collar, but kind of the everyman feel where you could listen to a Joe Rogan conversation and it's intellectual, but you can kind of follow it. And I think what we've been doing over the past 6 months to a year, I guess, is kind of, just trying to talk to regular people. And I've been enjoying it. I think every episode we do, it kind of gets better. We have some real gems in there. I would say the last two that we did, the one was with Kyle on the Israel-Palestine thing, and then the one before that was about college tuition. As far as audio quality and I guess content goes, I think those were two of our best ones thus far. So I'm just looking forward to continuing it because I'm definitely really, really enjoying it. And again, thanks to you guys for, doing all this cross-pollination of content because I think it's really working out for everyone. And I guess if we're going to pass it along, how about you, Trey? We haven't actually spoken a lot, but I know you're kind of just you're the latest Libertarian Union member, I think. So why don't you tell us, kind of why you got into this?
Well, I was introduced to libertarianism in 2007 during Ron Paul's 2008 campaign. And it's been a long journey since then. I went through a period in there where, so I was introduced to Ron Paul at about the time I was being introduced to, like, left anarchism, because I was just starting to become so upset with how the government had been running. And I mean, I was young at the time. I was 17. So all I had saw in this time that I was developing how I saw how the world worked, I was watching George Bush and Dick Cheney just destroy Iraq for what I saw was no reason. So I think my answer to that, since Dick Cheney and Halliburton and everything, I saw the cronyism as equivalent to capitalism. Started reading Kropotkin and a little bit of Marx even. And then a friend of mine introduced me to Ron Paul, and I guess I hadn't realized that there were people on the right who were anti-war. So it just really changed the way that I saw the world. And the more I listened to him, the more I saw, because at the time I was more of a hippie, and then I saw that this Ron Paul guy was closer to a hippie than any hippie that I had ever known. Because all these other people, they want the state just to, push people around to do what they want, where this guy's just literally like, leave people the hell alone. So I think I appreciated that. He grabbed my attention with his anti-war message, but also being pro-capitalist. So it just sort of challenged my worldview. And since then, I've gone through a long journey, a lot of ins and outs from libertarianism, especially right after the Ron Paul 2008 campaign, right? Because it seemed, all the people around you, they're freedom fighters, and then it just seems like nobody's really listening to you, and everybody's just repeating talking points from MSNBC and Fox News. So basically, there was a lot of time in between then when I had gotten jaded by politics, and decided that the best thing I could do is improve my own life, and just produce more value for society rather than just bitching about how the state sucks, and that how all these perverse incentives have fucked up everybody's lives. So long story short, I've decided that being involved in politics is rather a waste of time and energy, and that the best thing that we can do is change conventions. As we've been sort of dancing around this whole time, a lot of us have been bringing up the word culture. Well, and what I think we actually mean by that, it's a loaded term, culture. But ultimately, because I think we'd all agree, if we were to eliminate the state tomorrow, but there were still all these people, left and right, who look towards solutions to the state, even if the state were gone tomorrow, those institutions would be back within months or years because these people are still demanding the state do things. So I think it's really undervalued. And I talked about this on Actual Anarchy when I was on talking about Trading Places, where, there are a lot of philosophical wonks in the libertarian world who are just completely obsessed with, like, concepts of the inalienability of the individual, which I would agree with on principle, but we get so caught up in, like, what is the truth, metaphysical truth of this thing, and that's what proves us right. People don't actually give a shit about that. People care, and I've said this before, people more care about, are they going to have a job next week? Just really simple things. And this is generations and generations of conditioning to, and there's a lot of parts of this, but ultimately I think people are trained to look for direction from some sort of higher authority, whether that be religion, the state, their institution of what sort of job they're in. So I think just to answer the broad question of why I'm doing this, it's to change conventions and at least get people to think about things in a more realistic way. And I think the most fundamental of ways that I'm trying to do that is by getting people to at least recognize what the state is, which once you realize that the state is just a mafia with legitimacy, and Dave Smith said this on his most recent episode. I think he said it in the most concise way that I've heard someone say it. The state is just a mafia posing as a human rights organization. So once you realize that, and you see the state as just, as a mafia, then you can no longer seek their support because you see them to be the root of all these problems. So, yeah, long story short, that's my thoughts. And while I've got the mic here, I'd just like to say there are two things one thing that Robert said. He was saying something about how the right recognizes the nature of the state. And while I think I get what he's saying, there are certain issues which they realize that the state is this social apparatus of violence, if you will. They see that when they think that their gun rights are being threatened, right? But they, at the same time, a lot of these people, and I'm speaking in broad brushstrokes here, but a lot of these people, at the same time, they also are all about back the blue. So there's sort of a cognitive dissonance there. Either you're against tyranny, or you have to recognize that the people that are going to take your guns are the police, right? So when it comes to some of the worst institutions of the state, the right supports the cops and the war state. Whereas then Kyle said something about how we have to appeal to the left because they're more receptive to the anti-war message, which I'm a little skeptical of because every one of my progressive friends have been shut up about the war state. And even now, as Trump's president, I've been talking about Yemen and and Syria and Afghanistan for the past year, and people kind of ignore it. The only people liking and sharing those posts are libertarians. So anyway, suffice to say that both of those things that they said are both true, in my opinion, and I would critique a little bit, but you should look for coalitions where you can find them, is in a nutshell what I'm trying to say. So yeah, anyway, sorry to go off on a whole long rant. I hope that was that it gives you guys a glimpse as to how I see the world exactly. But anyway, how about Patrick? What do you think about everything I just said?
Yeah, man, I totally agree, actually. So, but in terms, and I'm gonna jump off on that in a second. But in terms of why I started the podcast, I'm a narcissist, so I want people to worship me and my opinions. No, that was a joke. But I really talk a lot, and that's kind of who I am, and I've come to realize that. And when it comes to just driving my family and my friends and my spouse nuts about libertarianism and being in that evangelical phase that we were all in at one point, I think all of us. And so that combined with how much of a talker I am, my mom tells me that I have the gift of gab. So I really want people to listen to me because I think people do, but you're right. Most people don't give a shit about this kind of stuff. They're just worried about what's going on in their daily lives, and they're worried about, their kids and paying bills and their job and stuff like that. But what I really see and what really troubles me is just the American public sleepwalking into this Orwellian police state. And the Orwell analogy is, I think, overused, but we're really seeing this technocratic kind of this emerging surveillance police state where, you have security cameras everywhere. We have Homeland Security face-scanning towers in New York City, and we have Amazon Alexas purveying every single home. And I don't think that Orwell would have predicted that people would be installing their own surveillance equipment voluntarily and purchasing it through Amazon Alexa, which is freaking $30. And my entire family has these fucking things, and it's troublesome. And, with the smart TVs that record everything and just the Fourth Amendment being eviscerated in the courts. And so I figured that since I'm going to be an attorney pretty soon, I might I kind of have a duty within our sphere to do this legal analysis and try and talk about voluntary legal systems, but also talk about, and try and warn people of the state that we're sleepwalking into, and whether it's foreign wars, which the military-industrial complex, which is where they test out all this surveillance equipment in all the police states, and then it all funnels back to our police departments where police officers are trained to fear for their lives and they have no legal accountability. and it's pretty bleak, man. It's pretty dark, and maybe this is because I just got done reading John W. Whitehead's book, A Government of Wolves, which he's a civil libertarian, which I think is an oxymoron, because you can't have civil liberties without economic liberties, and I'm really irritated by civil libertarians. But I think that, like I said, I have a duty, in a sense, to go out there and try and warn people about what we're sleepwalking into. And I guess I could be a bit of a conspiracy theorist, but at the end of the day, I think that I'm right, and that, people like Patrick Henry, and I don't want to idolize the Founding Fathers, but people like that, we need people like that. Not necessarily leaders, but we need people to try to go around and wake everyone up and kind of ring the warning bells of what everyone's sleepwalking into. But so who hasn't spoken in a while? Does anyone want to jump on that?
I can jump in real quick. I think we've done the question for everyone right now at this point. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, so based on what everyone said, I feel like there's a consensus point of, Patrick, you just talked about things being pretty dark, and we did an episode with you where you interviewed us, Robert and I, about Larkin Rose's Candles in the Dark, which is a way of approaching people in a collaborative manner to identify with them in an area where you both agree on something. And then you show them in very specific and literal messaging, how that is carried out via the state. And you kind of are trying to help open their eyes a little bit, but you find that common ground to where you're not debating them, you're not trying to defeat them, you're just trying to show them that cognitive dissonance. And all the points that have been made where, Kyle, you were talking about the left can maybe be reached on this anti-war stuff, and Robert, you were saying on the right, people are distrustful of government, or they want more economic freedoms and things like that. And I feel like maybe these tactics are a way to promote that culture, or what was the term that you used, Trey? The
conventions.
The conventions, and it's almost a one-on-one situation with this Candles in the Dark stuff. But I really believe that that's a very good tactic, especially when we talk about our homes and our families and our communities being vitally important. Those are the things that people really care about, and perhaps that's one way to get kind of the brush fires going again. And just for reference for anyone listening, that was libertyweekly.net/26. And anyone want to jump off on that? Maybe Patrick, you were just talking, and you did the interview with us. What do you think about that tactic going forward?
Well, first you have to get people that want to actually talk about politics, because and maybe this is just because I'm an overflowing kind of deluge of libertarianism, but no one wants to engage with me on this stuff, and I feel like I'm always talking at a brick wall. And I guess I don't blame people for that, because, like I said, no one cares, because they're concerned with the things that matter to them in their lives, like their jobs and stuff. But I've just kind of been burnt out recently with that, and that's why I do the show, because I have that outlet, and I think it's been good so far. I talked with Keith Knight on Keith Knight's Don't Tread on Anyone, and I think that you do have success with people doing candles, because you have to find that common ground, because otherwise you're just adverse. And I think that those tactics, if you get someone in that situation, they really do work. And you have to realize that you're not going to convince someone in one sitting. So just to kind of light that spark and try and be a paragon, someone who has virtue in terms of being a decent person and kind and understanding, and try to appeal to them on that human level, being, what is that part of the logic where you appeal to someone just based off of your virtue? I forget, but I think that's the right way to go. Yeah. Or is it pathos? I don't know. One of those. But
you're right. Ethos is more about the individual. It's more kind of authoritarian, I guess.
Okay. Yeah. But yeah, what do you think, Trey? Since you hopped on, do you know about the candlesing method?
I I feel like I've heard of it. Could someone remind me exactly what the parable is?
Daniel?
Robert, you want to hop in on this? I think you're pretty good at it.
No, I'm not. Go ahead, Daniel. I got some other things to talk about here in a minute, though.
All right. So essentially, it's a way of recognizing where conversations tend to go and avoiding the traps and helping people along to not be adversarial. You're not trying to defeat them in an argument. You're trying to find some common ground. You both agree on something, and then you show them in literal and specific ways on what they're advocating. Like, Trey, do you advocate that if I don't pay the politicians the money that they're demanding from me, that men with guns will come and take me away, put me in a cage? And if they start trailing off on, well, we need to have some sort of, policing authority or something. No, Trey, I'm talking to you. Do you advocate that this happened to me? Do you authorize that this happens to me? So that you make it very, very personal and very specific. And the goal isn't to get them to necessarily see it right away, but you get them into a pretzel where they come to a point where they have to make that moral decision, and it conflicts with what their propagandization has been. And so they approach cognitive dissonance, and at that point, you're kind of done, really. I mean, if they want to continue talking, you certainly can, but generally what will happen is if they're not a psychopath, because some people just can't be reached, right? They say might is right, and I don't care how it gets done as long as it gets done. If they don't have a moral compass, then you're not really going to have any success with them. But if you spark this with them, it'll be stuck in their head for a while, and they'll come to the point where they may come back to you and say, "Hey, do you have any more of those, those ideas or any books that you should recommend or anything that I should listen to?" And it then becomes important to have that background and that knowledge about Mises and Rothbard and all of those things, because then you have those resources at the ready. But it really is a point of getting them interested to follow those rabbit trails on their own volition. Like, you can't force feed these people. You can't lead that horse to water and make him drink,
Right. So now that you mention it, yeah, I do kind of remember the episode of Liberty Weekly where you guys were talking about this. And, man, this is really sort of where it comes down to with libertarians, is all about tactics, right? That's really the big thing that, because I think a lot of people in the liberty movement, it's like you end up fighting not about the ideas, but about how we traverse these ideas from our fringe groups into the general public, or just with normies, I guess, as it were. But no, I've had success with tactics like this. I guess one specifically, there's a Bernie bro that I know who I've been friends with ever since we were young kids, and I haven't been able to convince him of the economic things. He's still all about red or blue shelling the 1%ers or whatever the joke is these days with progressives. But yeah, I mean, just appealing to people and yeah, really just planting seeds is sort of the big thing that I'm getting from this parable, where yeah, but it's a double-edged sword, because when you just come out right out and tell people that if you support, for example, if you support redistribution to the poor for government assistance, then you're basically doing an immoral thing, which is putting a gun to someone's head, in a vicarious way to fund a charitable act. Well, is that charity anymore? And you're basically just using the social apparatus of force to achieve a good thing. So is it a good thing? And I think, you at least get progressives who are willing to listen to you. You'll at least get some sort of concessions that, oh, shit, that maybe isn't a great thing. So yeah, I totally agree. But then you can also get into a place where you're putting people on the defensive, which I think we all know as libertarians may even drive us, when we're arguing with people, into a defensive mode where I don't know how many times you guys have been called fascist, but that kind of shit just bugs the fuck out of me, because the ideas which I am for are the exact opposite of fascism. So to have people charge you with being an authoritarian or being some sort of state worshiper, as long as it's this corporate overlord that's in power, you know what I mean? Like, putting people on the defensive isn't a good thing. But yeah, you do. I don't know that there is any other way that we can win hearts other than being real about what the state is. So yeah, as far as the candles in the dark analogy goes, I'm totally into it. Hey, Kenny, question for you. Have you heard any or learned of any parables like this that have helped inform the way that you discuss these issues with people to try to win converts, or at least win converts on a particular idea, maybe not the whole ideology?
I don't know. Yeah. I always liked the master builder analogy, talking about how financial bubbles form. But it's kind of esoteric, but just how it's not necessarily that, you run out of bricks. Uh-oh, just killed my mic. It's not necessarily that you run out of bricks and so you can't finish the project, but not knowing how many you start with, it affects your design. And so the parable goes, that the boom cycle that we're going through now, which right now I think we are in a boom cycle. If you look at the stock market and stuff like that, and Bitcoin, which is probably something that you want to do if you wanted to talk about bubbles. But anyway, you have all these resources and some of them aren't real, and it's better for the master builder to know of it sooner rather than later, because it affects how he would design the building. I'm not. It's a long parable. You can look it up on YouTube. But anyway, so Bitcoin, that's what I wanted to bring up anyway, because that's all over everything right now. Everybody wants to talk about Bitcoin, and I get into random conversations with people that just non-political people want to talk to me about the economy and the nature of money and how Bitcoin is money and all this stuff. And I think that it's pretty interesting topic. What about you guys, Tony? And what do you think about the Bitcoin craze?
Well, hold on. Why don't you put yourself out there? What's your take on Bitcoin?
My take? Okay.
Is it legitimate?
I think that it is legitimate in the sense that you could create a limited supply money substitute and circulate it as money. I think that the way that there's nothing wrong with the way that they're doing it. I think that because of already pre-existing distortions in the economy, it is distorting Bitcoin and all cryptocurrency, really, because there's these pressures going on in the monetary sphere where there's this really strong inflationary pressure because of all the money that the Fed has created to paper over the 2008 crash. And I don't know, it's just pushing money into, perceived safe assets. And so, I don't think there's anything wrong with the idea of cryptocurrency, but I think Bitcoin and the others right now are, maybe a little bit of a speculative boom right now, just because of the already existing distortions that were happening when it was created.
Yeah, is the value of Bitcoin, does it evaporate, if central banks or governments, and then their imposition into the monetary framework, if that disappears? Don't think that's happening anytime soon. But, this, I think, gets back to, you see a lot of debate among, libertarians and Austrians, and then certainly outside those circles about Bitcoin. And I think it just comes down to, the subjective theory of value. People like Peter Schiff will rail against Bitcoin all day, but then talk about the inherent value, quote unquote, within gold. And I think that anytime you use terms like inherent value, objective value, you're getting into dangerous territory. But it seems to me like crypto technology, blockchain technology, has a ton of potential for undermining, perhaps the greatest source of state power that there is, which is their control and manipulation and inflation of the monetary system. But to the gold bug's credit, gold has been valuable in some form or another for as long. Maybe somebody here knows when they can trace it back, but it seems very unlikely that in 100 years from now, gold is not going to be something that's desired. Is Bitcoin going to be desired? Is it going to be another cryptocurrency? Is the blockchain going to be used in some other way, like encryption can be used, or the internet in general, where it just makes it so unwieldy for the government to control the monetary system that it's this wonderful grab of power that's given back to the people? I don't know. I find anytime someone's speaking with like certainty on either end that I become suspicious. Tony, you have any specific thoughts on this?
Not really, honestly. I don't have much personal stake in Bitcoin because I'm too busy paying off a bunch of student loans. But I'd say I see Peter Schiff's point about, okay, yeah, Bitcoin has a controlled, finite kind of setup, but then there's potential for thousands of other cryptocurrencies. So, they can then compete with Bitcoin. So there's really no end to the possibility of how many cryptocurrencies are out there and whatnot. So I see that point. But again, I do agree with what you said about that. His whole rationale for gold kind of moves away from the subjective value theory, and I tend to be on that side. Like, yeah, Bitcoin could work if everyone adopts it and all that, but it seems to be right now it's not really been adopted as a means of exchange. It's more of a speculative thing at this point. There's not a huge amount of transactions occurring in Bitcoin, when you compare it to fiat currency, for example. That's pretty much all I don't pay attention too much about it. I do listen to both sides of the argument here and there, but it definitely seems like a bubble to me at this point. I don't know what anybody else thinks about that.
Say, could I interrupt real quick? So we were talking about, or Jeff was talking about how blockchain could liberate people, but I've also seen the equal but opposite worry about if central banks were to adopt blockchain technology, it could mean the very opposite thing. It could mean a lot of surveillance of people's transactions, and paper trails could be easily traced. I don't know much about the technology, though, and how feasible those worries are. So I would just worry that the pendulum could swing the other way, unfortunately, with blockchain, but I don't know if anybody else has better insight on that. I just thought I'd throw it out there.
Yeah, in time comes to mind for me. Like, if blockchain became the armband thing that Justin Timberlake had, that had how much time he had left to live, and they could shut it down at any time, and they knew what you were buying and where you were. I mean, it's basically like your smartphone embedded in you with cryptocurrency, so it's like this surveillance device that you carry with you, and they've got transparency into everything that you're doing. That's kind of a scary thought. So, yeah, if it did get more in the hands of the state, that becomes pretty problematic, to use a leftist term. Robert, oh yeah, go ahead, Robert. I was going to swing it to you.
Oh, well, I was just going to mention, the question was, what are the world central banks, essentially, what are they doing in regards to Bitcoin? And I recently read a Bloomberg article that came out on December 17th, where they interviewed the heads of all the central banks around the world, and many of them are looking to, it's actually a very funny article, quite hilarious, from my point of view, but they're all looking into it and creating their own cryptocurrencies. I think it's funny that I don't know if the actual intent of the original Bitcoin was to subvert the fiat of central banks, but it's certainly, that is one of the hopes of it, right? And here you have all these central banks trying to get in on that to as something that people desire. So it's, I don't see anybody really jumping to a central bank crypto, since that's what we're trying to get away from. But I don't know, maybe some people would support some sort of a central bank crypto as being supported by, violence and force and all that stuff. So I don't know. I've got other thoughts, but I think most of them have already been said. So what did you want to get into, Daniel?
Previously, you'd indicated you had a thing to say, and I wasn't sure if we were ready to jump into that.
Well, I had some loose, scattered thoughts about the various conversations so far. I heard a lot of, and I've felt this, and I've heard Dave Smith talk about this, and other libertarians talk about this, and just kind of the frustrating lack of progress from the Ron Paul revolution and how that's kind of died away. And I just want to give some kind of encouraging words of hope, sort of, because people have a high time preference, like we've said, where people are more interested in their immediate situation. Like, do they have a job this week? Can they take care of their kids? Do they have a roof over their heads? That sort of thing. And they don't really spend a lot of time on these high-minded liberty philosophical ideas because they don't see how they apply to their current situation. And it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of time to build up this kind of overall movement. I mean, if you had asked somebody in 1990, who was perfectly socially liberal and was like, yeah, what business does the government have to tell who can and cannot get married? None of their business. When, gay marriage would actually be legal, or even in like 2005 or something like that, and then in just a few years, okay, here it is. So the exponential growth is something that I kind of wanted to mention, that when you convince a person, and then they convince a person, and then they convince a person, it only takes a couple of jumps before it reaches, numbers into the tens and hundreds of thousands. And you don't even realize it at first. It's quite hidden. You don't even notice it. But then all of a sudden there's this big explosion. So we may seem like we're kind of like grinding our gears. I've had friends of mine ask me, why are you doing this? You're just kind of wasting your time. It's too big. You're never going to change anything. And it may seem like that now, but just give it some time. Keep doing what you're doing, and I think we'll all be surprised by the result of our efforts in maybe a decade or two. And
I mean, to your point, Robert. I mean, most of us didn't even have shows till this year. I mean, just imagine that. I mean, this whole Libertarian Union thing, all these shows are new.
Yeah.
I mean, that's growth right there, and we're all promoting things. We're all getting a small audience. We're all reaching people in some way. And if we can, spark someone else to then do their own thing, and they spark someone else, like Robert was just saying, I mean, it does start to build on itself and start that big snowball.
Right, and we are fighting against the free stuff, the handed out by the state. So if we could just, convince people that, hey, you're going to get more stuff. I don't know. People are pragmatic, so maybe they'll respond to, more. I mean, I appreciate the moral argument. That's what won me over to this stuff. I consider myself, I think it's a moral philosophy, and that's all it needs to be for me. There are other people who take it as a more pragmatic approach, and like you'll get more X's and more Y's with this, which I think there are probably a whole lot more of them than there are of me. So maybe if we could explain how you'll get more stuff with freedom. I don't know. But either way, yeah, it's we've already seen a lot of growth, and don't get discouraged. I guess that's what I want to say.
Yeah, and in light of that, I wanted to throw a question to Kyle, because we haven't really heard from him lately. But Kyle, I wanted to ask you if, what what has your experience been trying to engage people in your life about what's happening abroad and in the Middle East, and what our foreign policy is just doing to destroy the world, in effect? Have you seen any success with your show, and just in your personal life?
I've had more success with my show than with any way I found to communicate with people in other ways. Whether I've had so many Facebook arguments and nobody was ever convinced by anything. I've talked to people face to face and nobody's ever convinced by anything. But occasionally I'll get either an email or a Facebook message, maybe somebody I knew from high school or like a parent's friend or something, just saying, "Wow, like you're making really good points," and then I'll see them start posting things about Yemen on Facebook or something like that. And so for whatever reason, I think that this podcasting medium is one where you could, give your point without it being so forceful and confrontational. The other person doesn't have to, accept either face-to-face with you or, in the Facebook public forum that they're wrong, which is something that, a lot of people really struggle to do, and it creates a lot of emotions. So I find this to be really successful. But it's so hard to talk about, especially in public, just because, if I'm trying to portray, what's really going on in the Middle East, I mean, we have slave trade in Libya. Libya is a rape state. There's a genocide in Yemen. There's famine in Somalia and South Sudan. The drone war is about to expand to West Africa, Afghanistan. These poor kids, these poor Pashtun kids that are now fighting for the Taliban weren't even alive on 9/11, have never even heard of it, have no idea, what Manhattan or New York City looks like or is, or what the skyline looked like before 9/11 and after. And so, to explain this to somebody, it's just too much. I think a lot of people just find it depressing, and, they rather talk about reality TV or, whatever else is going on, football. So that's generally been my experience. But I have had success, and this is the best way I have found to convince people at all of our ideas, or just inform people, because I think, with the libertarian position, the most powerful thing is that whenever they, are just informed on what's going on in the world, I think they have to be upset with the status quo. And then as you explain the philosophy, I mean, obviously we're right, so it goes well from there. Has anybody else had any success? I don't know, maybe you, Kenny, with people telling you, "Hey, my podcast converted somebody"? I know you have the great Dr. Walter Block on, and that was one of my favorite episodes from the Libertarian Union I heard in the past year.
Yeah, I mean, I've had some success. I don't know. I've had success face-to-face with people too, but it is a lot like the candle in the dark method, we were talking about earlier. And it's hard for me because I'm someone who thinks things really practically, and so I just expect that I present the logic of my argument, and then obviously being me, it's unassailable, and then they are magically convinced, right? That's in my mind how it should work. Unfortunately, I've had to learn the hard way that that's not really how it works. And so you have to kind of, try and look at things from their point of view. And I think the fighting against people getting free stuff is another good point. The other thing I wanted to bring up when we were talking about that was we got to figure out how to make libertarianism cool, explain to people how it'll get them laid. And then that's when we'll be able to, actually make some progress on converting hearts and minds. Because, I mean, obviously, that's kind of how the world works. So
Wait. Libertarianism gets you laid?
Is that why you're wearing the wizard's hat, Kenny? To show
Yes, exactly. This is how it gets you laid, man.
This is why we have so many girls on the show.
Right? Dude, all I want to say is that our intro is recorded by a girl for free. So, I mean, we got groupies. I mean, what are you going to do?
That's my wife you're talking about.
Oh, sorry. Well, you're groupie then.
No, she's great. No, yeah. But I mean, come on. Rugged individualism is sexy. We should be able to sell this. I mean,
no, it is, and being yourself too. I don't know. I heard an interesting thing on new band that I like, brand new, just came out with a new album, and they have this like talking part where they're talking about how like in today's age, it's hard to tell, like when you're trying to be an individual, it's hard to tell whether or not you're trying to be an individual because you want to be an individual or because you're told that you're supposed to be an individual, right? And so you're like, so it's this weird duality where, you know, we have to recognize that 99% of the human experience is the same everywhere with every person, pretty much. You know, we all want very similar things, but then at the same time, it's that 1% that makes everybody unique. And, you know, relying on yourself and rugged individualism is sexy, and having your own opinions that you've thought through, that you can defend coherently, that you never have to point to, you know, oh, I heard this on TV, or, you know, whatever this is what Walter Cronkite, I'm obviously not him, but whoever the modern day equivalent is, Anderson Cooper, you know, don't have to point to, oh, this is what he said, you know, that is sexy. So I think that's another thing in 2018 we got to get to. Obviously, in wizard outfits are sexy. So, you know, that's where I'm coming from in the new year.
Oh, I hear Road Pirate in the background.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
No, not a big deal.
The unfortunate thing is, though, that a lot of people, it is really hard, actually, to sell individualism, unfortunately, right? Like, even though it has such veracity to us, like, it's just so easy for, and this traverses the left-right paradigm, just the simple idea that the individual matters and that we have to protect individuals in order, you know, you see this with people on the right with the war state, that we have to sacrifice the collateral damage overseas so that we have to, you know, fight them over there so we don't fight them over here. And the same with progressives. They don't care that rich people want to that we have to, you know, tax rich people and that their capital holdings are going to suffer because the needs of all these poor people need to be met. So that really is like the battle to fight is the sovereignty of the individual. And I have a hard time with that one, with people on the left and the right, just to traverse that sort of dichotomy.
Yeah, and Tony and Jeff, can you guys, I know that you have a lot of friends, right? And when we were on your show, we were kind of talking about how you've had success within like your friends and family group. Is that true? How have you reached them? Are they naturally libertarian, or how have you done that?
Tony, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I do kind of work from that candles perspective when I'm talking to people I know. I think if you get personal and you kind of go that route of, you know, would you want this to happen to me? Would you want me to be put in a cage because I was smoking a plant type thing? You know, it's very hard for someone to realistically say that they would want to see that happen to you. And then if you take it even more personal, would you put me in a cage yourself? You know, something like that. I mean, because it's easy to feel separated from what the government does, but, you know, they're supposedly acting as our agents. They're taking our money to do what they got to do. So when I've always been convinced by like very simple arguments kind of brought down to the most simplistic way. And I don't know, when I'm talking to friends and family, if I break it down that way, it seems to work. But if I could go back to what I think Trey was just saying about the rugged individualism thing, I think that I've been thinking about it a lot in the past couple of weeks because I heard something on the Dave Rubin show, and then I was listening to Brett Weinstein, and I kind of force myself to listen to Sam Harris's podcast all the time because I kind of want to get that intelligent perspective. Well, like the people who are intelligent on the left, they are, as much as they'll talk about liberty in their whatever they see liberty as, these guys are people who have no real respect for rugged individualism, no real respect for individualism unless it's their own individualism. They see themselves as, we're the people who we're good people and we're smart people. So just listen to what we have to say, because we're going to tell you the best way for you to do your thing. And I think the best way to fight against that, because, yeah, I mean, they might be well-intentioned, just like a lot of people in these positions are, or at least go into it well-intentioned. But, you know, people fuck up all the time. And I think a good way to fight this battle is kind of, we have plenty of evidence, man. There's been so many fuck-ups on the side of government in the past 100 years alone, and you could point to it worldwide. Governments all over the place, you know, not just the U.S. government, but, you know, there's been even worse atrocities elsewhere. And then you could point to, you know, just mistakes that have happened on a more local level, local government. Like, there's so many ways to point to say, hey, this is what happened when you kind of give up individualism and you outsource responsibility. You know, these are all the bad things that can happen. So I think you can make personal responsibility and individualism kind of sexy just by proving that, or showing that, hey, if you look at all this outsourcing of responsibility that has been done, and look at all the atrocities that have followed. You know, like, you don't have to have all these technocrats and all these people tinkering here and there to try to make the perfect society, because they can't do it. And there's countless examples that they can't do it. So I don't know, Jeff, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, no, well said. Someone before mentioned empathy. And when you're talking to people, you try to view it from their perspective. Jordan Peterson goes into, when I can understand a bit of what he's trying to explain about psychology, you know, sort of the mindset of different personalities and how they tend to go left or right. And I think at least from my perspective, the reality is that it's very hard to get to the liberty position, whether it's that we're not naturally born thinking that way, or it's just the nurture aspect of society. You don't get these perspectives until you're a little older, and it's really, really hard to deprogram, come to terms with that reality. I'll speak it for myself for sure. I'm sure it's similar for a number of people here. When you're going through that discovery process, it's very painful. It's very kind of scary, because you haven't really come to understand yet why this is a good thing, and what the you know, how the world could be better than it is the way now. You have these sort of sacred cows in society that you need to deconstruct. So when I'm talking to people, whether it's family or friends, I've taken a position of just sort of almost sitting back and being opportunistic, because controversial topics are going to come up. That's what people do. They talk politics. And then you can find, I think, pretty quickly, once you get good at it, what things they care about. And then, you know, where, like, the name of our show comes from, and what I think we're trying to do is, when there's a pain point in society, you know, you're talking about, like, student loan debt, for example. You know, it's sort of incumbent on us to understand where that comes from, and then explain. This is the good thing about being a libertarian, is that almost all the major ills of society really do boil down to government in one form or another. And if you can articulate that well, and you can get down to that, and you could just keep hammering that point, yeah, but you know what, if they weren't doing this and they weren't intervening here, which is a totally unnatural, and by the way, immoral, if you want to go there, you know, a thing that the government's doing, that is having this whole fallout, and all the solutions that you're proposing is basically trying to put band-aids, you know, on a problem that would not exist in the first place. And in fact, we would be, you know, much better off if it, you know, we had not diverted resources and interfered with people's personal rights to get to this place. So that's kind of the approach I've taken, and then just sort of read the person that I'm with and see if they have the appetite for more, and if not, then just sort of wait until I see them the next time. And I've personally had, I think, a lot of success with that approach.
No, that's a real good point, Jeff. Like, last night I was kind of talking to my wife about this, and I had Dave Smith on, and that part about the government being a mob posing as a human rights organization came up, and I realized that, like, it's pretty simple. Our philosophy is pretty damn simple. Don't hit people and don't take their stuff, you know, and everything that we talk about just boils down to that basic premise. Like, so you would think it would be easy, it would be easy to articulate that and apply it.
Yeah, and having the cultural impact. I mean, you have Owen Benjamin now, who I think is doing a great job. You have Dave Smith, the left and the SJWs. I mean, they're just utterly pathetic and not cool at the moment. I think you're starting to see some statistics about the next generation and the way that they're sort of recoiling from that. So I think there's a little bit of an opportunity here where maybe, these ideas can be cool. But like anything else, there's a pendulum to it and a swing. And, I think we just need to make sure that as people are sort of rejecting those other ideas and they're looking for something else, that we jump in and offer this idea of freedom and liberty. Otherwise, you end up going down a neocon trap, or you just end up in the same place, but on the other side.
Yeah, as the pendulum starts to swing, we have to kind of recapture that fervor that the Ron Paul movement had, because we don't want the Richard Spencers of the world to capitalize on this pendulum swing, because they're just going to take us to that totalitarian, the fascist version, I guess, the white ethno-state version. And that is just as bad as, where the SJWs want to take us, I would say.
And who would you like to pass that potato to?
Anyway, so Daniel, since you're the sorry about that, man. I was just about to say, Daniel, go ahead. I don't know, have a question necessarily, I guess. I mean, well, you know what? Actually, one thing kind of ties into all this is I've been thinking about the Libertarian Party too. And if I had any stake in the Libertarian Party, which I don't, what I would be telling them is stop trying to play nice and just start pointing out how the Republicans have fucked you over and how the Democrats have fucked you over, and just hammer that all the time. That's what I would do. My strategy would just be, don't waste your fucking hate, and just start telling everybody where you've been getting screwed over by both parties at all times. I mean, you can coalition build and all that kind of stuff in your, once you get in office and you have to make compromises, but there's no reason to try to play nice when you're not even in office. Just keep hammering them, because there's plenty to hammer. Okay, so Daniel, what do you think about that?
Well, I also don't have a dog in this fight. I'm not a big fan of politics in general, and I think that it is the allegory of the Lord of the Rings, right? The ring of power that everyone's vying to get a hold of. And the Libertarian Party has been a disappointment for me, especially in the past year, because they were sort of doing this witch hunt for people who wouldn't sign a pledge or might be sympathetic to something because they didn't denounce it, and that's just a ridiculous thing or you didn't sign the anti-cancer pledge, you must be pro-cancer. What? That doesn't make any sense. And so it's almost an SJW tactic where you have to be inclusive and you can't leave anyone out, because if you do leave them out, then that means that you've violently assaulted them with your words or lack of words, and that's just also ridiculous. So my advice for the Libertarian Party is stand down. Practice agorism, techno-agorism. Don't give them almost a tacit consent, like, hey, I'm going to play in your box here of politics. Fuck them. Fuck politics. Is kind of my thoughts on it. I think that as an individual and as technology progresses, we will be able to form community with each other, with like-mindeds. We will be able to practice agorism more and more. We will be able to vote with our feet. We will be able to put our lives in different jurisdictions so no one state has control over us. I think that those are a lot of the ways where people who are already on the bleeding edge of libertarianism can start living the life that they want without the rest of society necessarily being ready for it. I mean, of course, continue to work for it and educate people and do the candles thing and try to get those close to you to at least be confronted with cognitive dissonance so that, you're planting seeds along the way. But really, what's stopping us from working towards what we want as individuals? And I think that that's probably the best way to go. I mean, my wife and I and our kids, we have a plan to grasp that on our own accord, and I'm working towards that. And the show is part of that, but so is the Black and Dot Gold stuff. And I know Tom does the Happy Earner internet marketing stuff. He's doing quite well with that. And it's really about empowering people with the vast opportunity that's in front of us. And so many people get trapped in, I have to work this crummy job for this crummy guy who's exploiting me and not paying me enough wages or whatever. Well, if you don't like it, stop doing it. Figure out something else. I mean, we have so many opportunities ahead of us. If you hate what you're doing, then direct it into something more productive. And I don't know, I'm just kind of ranting at this point. But thank you guys for explaining what Don't Waste Your Hate stands for, because what I think it is people are upset about something, but they're misdirecting that, and they're looking to government to solve those problems. But you're there saying, no, the government is the problem. It's creating this, and so running to them for the problem is just going to get additional intervention to try to correct for the previous intervention, ending up making things worse. So who have we not heard from in a while? Trey, give me your thoughts on your advice for the Libertarian Party. I say fuck them, and fuck politics.
Yeah, I mean, if the Libertarian Party isn't a good example of a lot of the problems that we have culturally within the Libertarian movement, I'm not sure what is. I think we spent a lot of time early in this roundtable talking about winning converts through getting involved in culture to win these converts. And I don't know, we almost have a huge problem with keeping people as libertarians. The last 2 years is a pretty good show of that. You had a lot of mass flight from libertarianism into more paleo or alt-light, I guess you could call them, the bordertarians. And man, these are specific issues that I think deserve the intellectual exercise of debating the pragmatism of which parts of the state do we eliminate first, right? But that's a wholly different thing than people completely abandoning their first principles in placement for what they see as pragmatic. Just recently, I pissed a lot of people off by posting about ending Social Security, and I had a lot of libertarians. I'm arguing with someone right now on Twitter who's just pissed at me. They're saying they're allegedly a hardcore voluntarist, but they think because I want to end Social Security payouts that I want old people to die, And man, that just bugs me, because kind of going back to what you were just talking about with the whole "don't waste your hate," the whole message of Tony and Jeff's show is to sort of look at the root of this problem from the first place. These old people are dependent on a fraudulent, insolvent redistribution system, and I think their dependency on that was, think of all the money that people paid into Social Security. If it were to go into some sort of privately held investment firm that actually gave a return on investments because they weren't just blowing the money on like the Vietnam War or some shit, you could actually have a redress of grievances when your payout isn't exactly what you were promised. So as far as I'm concerned, Social Security is a pretty good example of the state failing to return its promise, and you can't trust that system anymore. And the best thing we can do is to phase that shit out and just stop going with it. And people's biggest argument is always, oh, well, I paid into it, I deserve something out. Sorry, it's gone. That money is gone, and you're not getting it back from anybody. Good luck getting money back from getting your money back from a nameless and faceless entity. You're not going to be able to name an aggressor if you're trying to get money back from the state, especially if you're trying to use its own apparatuses to get it back. So anyway, basically the long and the short of it is we have a lot of blind spots with people within our own movement, and I really don't know what to do about that. If we're so fractured as a group, then I'm not sure, and I think maybe the big thing does come down to just believing very strongly in individualism, and that we all do have sort of our own goals and our own values. But yeah, basically, the Libertarian Party, it should serve as a vehicle for the message, and we shouldn't be worrying about electability, right? I think, what's his name? He was with McAfee, Judd Weiss. His message about how the Libertarian Party should stop putting so many resources into an unwinnable election, into the presidential election. I mean, yeah, if they are to engage in politics in any sort of way, we should be going for the most small of public sector positions. I'm talking like, in your county and your city, getting libertarian candidates in there and showing how even on a micro level, if we balance budgets, or at least eliminate certain services from the state that are parasitic, then we could show how this could happen or how it could work on a larger scale. So yeah, basically, long and the short of it is the Libertarian Party is a waste of money, and I think that your $20 you could pledge to the Libertarian Party would be much more better used if you were to donate them to any podcaster. Would probably be more productive. That $20 would be more productive in the hands of people who you think are delivering the message very well. So any of the patron programs that any of the people in the Libertarian Union offer. There are other podcasts like Dave Smith's Part of the Problem, Lions of Liberty. Tom Wood's show is probably the most I've benefited from any podcast is Tom Wood's show. So yeah, basically I think we should stop trying to change the mafia from inside. That's not going to happen. Anyway, to turn this problem back over, I think one thing that often gets neglected is the war state. And unfortunately, this is one thing where we do have to work within the state. And I know I'm contradicting my last, the last point that I made, but I guess I'm just kind of curious, asking sort of Kyle. There have been a lot of injunctions that have came up this past year, namely the H-Con Res. I don't remember what it was, 232 or something. That was to invoke the War Powers Act. So I'm curious, could we sort of, Kyle, do you know of any ways that we could engage in the political apparatus to destroy the war state, since the Libertarian Party obviously isn't trying to engage in that kind of activity?
I really don't think so. I guess it was H-Con Res 81, and what it did, it was a bill that I think ended up with close to 40 co-sponsors, bipartisan support, and then the House leadership basically was able to defeat the bill by saying, it doesn't actually fall under the the purview of the War Powers Act, and they killed it. And so there's not even a pretense of democracy or any type of constitutional republic left in America. What we absolutely have is the government could do whatever they want, right? They could just say, this really doesn't qualify as this, so we're not even going to vote on it. And so I guess the political solution seems pretty bleak to me. Even when you're able to get senators to care a little bit about some of these foreign policy issues, like now we've had several senators, Rand Paul, Todd Young, Chris Murphy, several more I can't think of, Bernie Sanders even, all, take somewhat, at least acknowledge what's going on in Yemen and say what Saudi Arabia is doing there is a war crime. But even having about 10 senators who obviously know that, hundreds of thousands of babies are starving to death in Yemen, they still can't do anything about it because, the weapons lobby is just too strong. So, I really don't see much of a solution. I think one of the ways to talk about it is, like what Trey was saying with the Social Security, to take these radical positions. And one time I told someone, I was like, it's not my generation's fault that your generation allowed, your retirement savings to be put up as collateral for war debt. I wasn't even old enough to vote in 2001 when we went to both, Afghanistan and then 2003 Iraq. And all those trillions of dollars, that could have been in the retirement fund, that could have been there in the Social Security fund, but instead was leveraged to wage an immoral war. And so, you got to take that position and explain to people whenever, if, they could just tax and steal the money, they're going to continue to do it. But that's why we can't allow all the heavy taxation and monetary printing and all that, because, we have to pay for everything, because when we don't pay for things, then we end up with a, $5.56 trillion now has been spent on the war. In total, the war debt is going to cost, I think, like $8 trillion in interest or in some insane number like that. We've only paid $500 billion of it so far. I mean, the amount of debt that we have put on our country because of the war is astronomical, and we continue to spend $700 billion a year. And if you really look at the whole national security apparatus, we're going to spend about $1 trillion in 2018 on national security and, forward offensive military capabilities and all this insane spending that we do on the military. Right now we're revamping the nuclear weapons program, so we're building new submarines and new missiles and new bombers right after building the F-35 and the new class of aircraft carriers and destroyers. None of the technology works. All the new destroyers and the new F-35s aren't very good. But yet we spend, millions and billions and trillions of dollars on this kind of stuff. So, I don't see much of a political solution. I don't see much of a point in putting any effort into the Libertarian Party. They're wholly unsuccessful. Even libertarians don't like them. And so if the Libertarian Party can't be a rallying point for libertarians, then it's pointless. If there's a national party that's Libertarian Party, and that's what every libertarian feels, comfortable sending a link to their friends to say, oh, hey, check this out. But if the Libertarian Party is so controversial, then as Trey was saying, he made the best point that we just send the money to a podcaster. Imagine what we could do if we split the, Libertarian Party budget, even 10% of it, and send it to Tom Wood. Imagine what he could do with Liberty Classroom and, his podcast and his show. And this it could be a huge thing. But instead, it feels like a waste of money to run, a 90-second ad with Gary Johnson on your local TV station or something like that. Just give the money to somebody else. I'm not even asking for donations. Just give the money to somebody other than the LP. Does anybody else have similar feelings, or does anybody support the LP? I don't know about you, Kenny. I know at one point I think you were an actual LP card-carrying member.
Yeah, Walter Block has a really good pragmatic point, which is that, it may not be the best, but it's kind of all we got. So as far as the Libertarian Party, I think a lot of good points being made. Keep it local. I don't think that I'm too interested in what, the national candidate is going to be. But there's some campaigns that I get behind, like, Larry Sharp is a really articulate and good messenger for liberty. And I think that he, does his campaign to win, but it's also a good vehicle for education, So, I don't want to write it off entirely, but I guess really where I would go is that basically the national leadership of the LP is completely worthless, in my opinion. And maybe that's strong, but I've talked to the chairman, I've talked to some of the LNC members on my show, and, they're waffly on some really hardcore libertarian issues, especially freedom of association, which is hard for a lot of libertarians. It's hard to say that, especially now, it's white supremacy is the big thing. It's hard to say that libertarianism is compatible with white supremacy, right? But in the most basic sense, it is, right? Like, you could be a libertarian white supremacist just so long as you're not advocating violence to support your views, right? So, squaring that up is hard, but I like to try and say, in that aspect, it also gives you the freedom to be, really the opposite side. If you want to be really multiculturally diverse, then libertarianism is completely compatible with that as well. So, I mean, it's a really tough thing. I say pick and choose. I think that the LP, like so many things, it's tempting to think of organizations as the state, the LP, whatever, as monolithic entities, that's like a smooth edifice from which we interact with them. The LP, it's this big thing or whatever, but really everything is made up of people. And so, there are some good things the LP are doing. There's some good LP members, just as, there are probably people that are in the state that aren't that bad. Probably not many, but, a couple. The ditch diggers, whatever, but at the very lowest level, they're fine. They're just doing a job. So, that's what I would say about the LP and about the state in general and just life in general, is that we're made up of individuals. Everything that seems like a big monolith is actually a bunch of, minute interactions between two individuals or a group of individuals. So,
all right,
Dan?
Kenny, thank you. You're passing it to me? Perfect.
Yeah.
I was going to take it anyway. So we got about 10 minutes left, so why don't we turn this into a, it's a New Year's thing, so like a final, like maybe what was each of our favorite of our own shows, and one thing we're hopeful for in the coming year, and then we'll close it out, because I know Kyle's got a hard stop in about 10 minutes, and so we can wind this one down. So why don't we start with Patrick? What's your favorite episode of your own, and what are you hopeful for in the next year?
Man, that's like picking your own children. But I guess my favorite episode was either had to be my Warren v. District of Columbia, or all the stuff that I've done about voluntary legal systems. And I recently did my first documentary, in quotes, "Blood Makes the Green Grass Grow," talking about how the U.S. military conditions their soldiers to kill without mercy, and how mankind has an inherent resistance towards killing their own kind. And just to keep it short, I'd have to say that my favorite, or my hopes for 2018 is to get bigger guests on the show. I know that James Corbett listens to my podcast once in a while, just holla. And so I'm hoping to get on with him and other bigger names, maybe Vin Armani. And I'm hoping that will bring, more audience members, and I'm hoping that our audience will continue to support us and share the show. And I think that 2018 is I'm hoping going to be a good year personally, and probably not politically or for the world, but at least we got a good thing going, and I feel really good about it. And I think if we continue to work together throughout the next few years, we could really turn this into something, and that's my hope. So, who's next?
Ladies' choice. Patrick, go ahead.
I'd say Jeff and Tony.
Go ahead, Tony. You start off. Tony, on mute.
Yeah, as far as my favorite... You hear me now?
Yeah, go ahead, man.
Hello?
We can hear you.
Oh, all right, cool. Sorry. I thought somebody said I was muted. Anyway, as far as our favorite episodes, my favorite episodes, it would probably be the last two that we did. I mean, one thing that's good is I haven't felt like I've been taxed at all doing any of these conversations. I've enjoyed having all of them. But the last two, don'twasteyourhate.com/21 was a nice casual conversation, yet informative about the tuition crisis. And then don'twasteyourhate.com/22 was a great Israel-Palestine conversation that we had with Kyle over a foreign policy focus. So I've really been enjoying them, and I think we are starting to hit our stride as far as content and audio quality. So I'm just looking forward to continuing that trend, and hopefully maybe we are going to start bringing on some more guests to interview. That's probably what I would say is the most immediate 2018 goal for me anyway. What about you, Jeff?
Yeah, just quickly to build on that, my favorite episode I think was the Catalonia one. We talked with my cousin who's an ANCAP of the ANCAP persuasion, and it's just an interesting conversation about how to unwind government and to secede and what's legitimate and what's not, and things got kind of heated, and so I think those make for more interesting conversations when there's actual sincere disagreement. And yeah, looking forward, I just think just continuing to grow the show, get better. And I like to hear, Pat mentioned he did a documentary. I think we'd like to maybe, make our first couple of YouTube videos. I'd like to talk about the potential revival of Atlantic City, stuff going on with the FDA. Net neutrality has been a big deal where I think within our community has been a lot of disagreement. So, look for that stuff in 2018 from Don't Waste Your Hate. And how about I throw it to the actual Anarchy guys?
All right, go for it, Robert. I want to hear what your favorite episode is.
Oh, so many to choose from. Featuring all these great people on the call today, different episodes. One that jumps out to me just off the top of my head was a recent one that we did called The Founder. It's a very libertarian, like love letter type to capitalism sort of a movie. It shows that human beings aren't perfect, but when you have this, profit motive just gets vilified all the time. People just like greed is bad and all this sort of thing, and it can be. But profit motive motivates everybody. I mean, we're all profiting right now on this call, and it leads to people having the incentive to do wonderful things and to serve each other and to better their lives. And that movie really illustrated a lot of those things for me. And we had a good conversation. I think really enjoyed it. As far as 2018 goes, just more of the great same. Hopefully we grow the show. Hopefully I'm going to promote my own brand, and then that hopefully will do well. Looking forward to all that stuff. Daniel?
Yeah, I kind of figured that The Founder might be one of our top choices because it really did share a lot of the message around voluntarism and capitalism and being prepared. Luck finds the prepared, and I felt like that was a really good discussion. Not to take away from any of our other shows over the course of the year. We've had many great guests, and some of them are so good they come back several times, and we've got many more coming up in 2018. But I think The Founder was probably one of my favorite episodes as well. Though each of our other shows, our guests brought a level of expertise. Like when we had Kyle on talking about War Machine, I mean, he just like buried us in knowledge. He was just breaking it down, and it lended a level of legitimacy to the conversation that wouldn't have been possible if it had just been you and I, who are just vaguely aware of what's going on in the news. So I'm really thankful that someone like Kyle's out there really digging into this stuff. And even with Kenny being on for all of our Val Kilmer stuff, and Patrick being on for Star Wars Rogue One and The Shining. The Shining was also a really good episode. We had Doc Brown on for that. I know we were supposed to pick just one, but I don't know. It's like someone was saying earlier, it's hard to pick your favorite kid, right? So the other thing hopeful for next year is just to continue collaborating, building a community with you guys in the Libertarian Union, perhaps finding other ways to work together on projects. The documentaries sound really cool. Maybe coordinating our efforts a little bit, on a voluntary basis along those lines. And just continuing to improve our quality and our content so that we're not around begging for guests. They're coming to us. They're saying, hey, you guys are great. We want to be on your show. That's where I want to get. I want to keep honing our craft and getting better and better. So why don't I pass it over to Trey?
I suppose my favorite episode was with Rayford Davis. He is really interesting to talk to. He comes from this from this voluntarist, anarchist sort of perspective, and really is more targeting his message towards the police officers. I'm highly receptive to his message and the way that he's framing it because a lot of people in my family are cops. So it helps my lexicon as far as when I talk to my family, talking to that guy. So that was a tremendous benefit to me. And I really hope coming in the future, this next year, that I am able to get people on with that higher level of expertise to help me develop my frame of reference. I'd like to do more topical shows on very specific economic events or issues of the war state. I hope to get on someone like Stephan Kinsella to talk about intellectual property, because that's sort of a golden calf that we have in America and globally. So yeah, that's what I'm looking forward to. And yeah, I hope that perhaps we could do more collaborative things. And I've got some ideas that I could throw to the rest of the Libertarian Union guys. So yeah, that's what I got. How about you, Kyle?
Well, for 2017, my favorite I have a lot to choose from. I did over 100 episodes in 2017. My favorite may have been with Scott Horton, who was on my 100th show. We talked about his book, Fool's Errand, about Afghanistan, which I highly recommend for everyone who hasn't read it. Also, I did a recent episode with Will Porter on Trump's national security strategy, which is a big policy for Trump. It's a huge document, but we really went through and highlighted a lot of that stuff. So those would be the two I throw people to. For 2018, I think a big part of it is just staying alive. It looks like the United States is having a little bit more interference in Iran and the whole situation with North Korea. So, just hoping to make it through. But if we do, I have some big plans. I have a big announcement, hopefully coming in the beginning of the year, that I can share with everybody. As far as the show goes, I'm looking to have on more guests. Like I said, I've had on Will a few times, and Scott and Brian Sadie, but hoping to have on more people, get on shows, and then, continue what I'm doing with the blogging at the Libertarian Institute and expand on that a little bit as well. So let's kick it over to the man in the pointy hat.
All right. Well, my favorite of 2017, probably having Walter Block on to talk about the article that we wrote, just because, I don't know, it was feeling really good. It was, the feels were strong in that one. But, and also the message of it was really important, which is that libertarianism is a really thin philosophy, in that we're not really concerned with a ton of, your personal moral choices, other than the morality of the use of violence. And so it just was a really nice episode that highlights, I think, a key point for me. And then for 2018, I really want to try to get, some videos going. There's some things in the works, trying to expose more people to some core libertarian thinkers in a bigger way, which is, like in all things, it's happening slowly, but just keep plugging, and other than that, just keep trying to do what we're doing. I mean, earlier we were talking about sometimes you don't notice, but this is the kind of work that pays dividends. Getting together, talking with people, saying a few things, and then sparking some conversation. So that's what I want to keep doing.
All right, well said. Well, I think that was everybody, right? Unless, did we miss someone? Forever hold your peace. All right, and speaking of plugs, I'm going to end the show with a little bit of a plug, another replay of the thing from his wife, which is super awesome. But I just want to say Happy New Year to everyone, and do check out LibertarianUnion.com. You can find all of the shows and all of the members listed on this call, and also a few others that didn't make it. If you want for content, we've got content for days in a variety of subjects, and Cappy type subjects, but we cover a whole wide gamut of things to suit your taste. So do check it out, LibertarianUnion.com, and Happy New Year, everyone.
Happy New Year!
In the early days of the Internet, radical libertarians were scattered, lonely, and faceless. Without direction, they resigned to scour the web, sifting through content providers in a wasteland plagued by YouTube demonetization, Facebook jail, and covert Internet censorship. But then, in 2017, the Libertarian Union was formed. Finally, the average Joe Libertarian could find a thriving community of independent podcasters and content providers, all in one convenient location. At Libertarian Union, we'll always have the latest news, interviews, discussions, and even movie reviews. With hundreds of episodes and more added all the time, you'll always find something fresh at libertarianunion.com.